Hey, hello everybody, and welcome to Anxiety Unraveled. I am your host, Mike Maddox. I'm so glad that you're spending some of your precious time with us today on this podcast. If you're a longtime listener, you know that what we do on Anxiety Unraveled is we talk about anxiety disorders and things that are holding people back in their lives. We try to get those issues out of the shadows and into the open, and specifically talk about things that can help with healing and growth and living a life with some peace over anxiety. To do that, we love to have guests on the program. And today I am really excited about our guest. She is Susie Marsh with Susie's Organization Solutions, which is SOS for short. Susie is a licensed therapist operating out of West Michigan. And Susie, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I do want to explain that I am a licensed social worker and I am a professional organizer. So that's my specific background.
Yeah, and I know that there's varying license, categories depending on whether what you specialize in. But licensed social worker and an organization specialist. So that's fantastic. Yes. So, and Susie, you treat folks with hoarding disorder, and we're going to talk a lot about that on this episode today. And it's been something that's been, I think in the last maybe 10, 15 years, society's become more aware of this disorder, and there's been more in the news. But let's get beyond the kind of the TV headlines of it and just talk about what it is. So if we start with the stereotype of hoarding, can you just break it down for us and get us away from the stereotype and just define what is hoarding disorder and how does it impact the people that are struggling with it?
Yeah, so there's a lot of misconceptions with dealing with hoarding disorder. A lot of people don't like to even call themselves hoarders because it's got such a negative connotation to it. There's differing insight too, as whether the person has an understanding of if they have hoarding issues or not. It's definitely from mild to severe as far as the clients that I have worked with I've been in this business now close to 19 years and social worker for 35 years. So it's really different from person to person. But the main criteria for hoarding disorder is there's what's called the DSM-5, which is the diagnostic manual that therapists use to diagnose somebody. So the main things that they have to meet in their criteria, and it's only been a disorder since 2013. It actually was part of the diagnosis under OCD, but they found that there was a lot of difference with that. OCD, those behaviors were to reduce anxiety, to make the person feel better, whereas hoarding disorder is more of the person is actually getting a dopamine and serotonin boost and off of having the acquiring behavior. So they were seeing that there was a lot of difference in that. So it became its own disorder. But so in the disorder, so usually the person has a very difficult time discarding and letting go of things, like regardless of the value of the item. It can be recycling items. It can be something high end like jewelry. They can be acquiring all kinds of things. They have a perceived need to save the items and a lot of distress and anxiety over thinking about discarding that item. And so because they've accumulated a lot, their environment gets cluttered. They may have a whole lot of accumulation of possessions that congest and clutter the main areas of your house. It impacts your everyday life. It causes impairments. It may impact your school. If you're, that age, it impacts your work life, your home life, all of that. And the main thing too is it's not attributable to other conditions. So when they're looking at somebody with hoarding issues, are they also dealing with things like depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, anything else? Because they want to make sure it's not one of those as opposed to hoarding disorder. So yeah. So a lot of people, when they walk into a situation, they think, oh my gosh, this person's a hoarder. Right off the bat, they think that. there could be a lot of other things going on. It may be grief, depression that has caused a lot of this to happen. If they're able to let go of things easily or without a lot of problems, then a lot of times it's not hoarding disorder. They may have some tendencies, but they may not be full on in the disorder. So there's a lot of misconceptions and assumptions when it comes to working with people with excessive clutter.
So does it cross that line, for lack of a better way of saying it, to become a disorder when when the person is actually actively collecting to get that dopamine, to get that high they can't, and it's interfering with their life? I mean, where is that influx point where it goes from just a person who collects a lot of things and maybe is disorganized or has a lot of clutter to it's a disorder? Like, what is that? What's the differentiation there?
Usually it's, definitely we look to see whether the person can let go of items or not, or if it's a continual gathering of things like, oh my gosh, that was on sale today, so I had to get those things.
Yeah.
Or, oh my gosh, I saw that on the side of the road. So, oh my gosh, somebody was going to throw that away. So I gotta save it and I have to repurpose it and redo it. And they keep gathering and gathering. And then if it's impacting their spaces in their home, like you're going into pathways, there's no open pathways in the home. Health and safety hazards is when it starts crossing the line. Can't use their bathroom, can't access the furnace or utility room. It becomes dangerous. The worse and worse that it gets. That's where it starts crossing the line. Yeah, it's not just clutter, it's impacting their lives and they can't function well either.
That makes a lot of sense. And for a person who's struggling with hoarding disorder, what's going on, below the surface? What's going on neurologically or emotionally? Explain a little bit more about that. You talked about how collecting things or hoarding things does something emotionally or neurologically in their brain. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, they've actually had some brain scans done of people with hoarding disorder, and they just see such a difference between a quote unquote normal brain and somebody with hoarding disorder. The brain like lights up in all different areas of the brain, those pleasure centers and everything. So there's a lot more research coming out as to the whys and just studying this more and more, especially like you said, in the last 15 years, which people have become much more aware of it due to the TV shows, and it's just out there a lot more. Now, in respect to how to deal with the hoarding disorder, many times it's very personalized. So we have to look at the person individually on how we're going to address it.
So there's no one size fits all 5 steps to recovery kind of thing. It's very personalized and it depends on the individual.
Yeah. And so a lot of the background that I see in my clients that have hoarding disorder is I see generational hoarding. That's one of the questions I ask them. Do you have your parents or grandparents or anybody that has had this issue? And usually there's a yes in there somewhere. Somebody has had that issue, and so now they end up having it. So there's a genetic factor to it. Of course, what you grow up in is what you're used to and what you live in. And so a lot of times I'll see too, the kids of people with hoarding issues, they either go one way or the other. They become minimalistic or they become having hoarding issues themselves. It's really interesting. I haven't been able to dive into that research as to if how that happens that way, but there's all kinds of support groups out there for children of hoarders, essentially.
And a lot of the TV show Hoarders and like you mentioned the TV shows, I know a lot of people, including myself, will sometimes watch those shows and you get this emotional reaction in watching where you're like, just get rid of the stuff. Like, why can't they just put it in the get rid of pile? But what happens to the person who's got hoarding disorder? what does it feel like for them to try to throw something away or to get rid of it? What's preventing them from doing what we feel like as viewers they should do, which is just clean up and get rid of 80% of the stuff that's there? What's the
Mhm.
inhibitor there? What's it feel like for them?
Um, well, I'll give you an example of a client I just worked with last week, where I worked with her for years. And she is somebody that has enjoyed the outdoors, and she's brought a lot of the outdoors inside, like stones and rocks and flowers and just all kinds of that thing, like large collection has had over the years. And I've worked with her through multiple houses in different stages of her life. And when I asked her, because I wanted her to see if she could let go of some of the recycling materials, and because that's one of the things, she feels a responsibility to take care of these things, to, she will wash them out for, hours on end and make sure that those things are ready to be recycled, but they never get to recycling because she can't let go of them because she sees a purpose and a need for them. And then the indecisiveness will happen too a lot with people with the hoarding disorder. Perfectionism comes into that as well. If I can't do it right, then I'm not going to do it at all.
Hmm.
And with her, I said, so give me on a scale of 0, where you have no anxiety or upset or angst or anything over letting go of the item, to a 10, where it's like off the charts and you were just in super anxious mode. She was at a 9.5
Wow.
at that point. So I knew there was no way she was going to be letting go of anything that day. She was able to actually give me a little bit of recycling, but it was not any of the things that she had painstakingly taken care of and cleaned out and washed and set aside and had plans for, but never got there.
Yeah.
Um, so there, yeah.
This is where this is where hoarding disorder ties into or is closely related to anxiety disorder, because of all the different types of clinically defined anxiety disorders, the common denominator is to stop the undesired behavior, the anxiety level goes through the charts, right? So it's not as easy as just stopping, like people would say, just stop
Yes.
hoarding or get rid of stuff, because of the level of anxiety your client shared with you, a 9.5. And that makes it really hard, or if not, or impossible at that point, to do some things that others might think are simple to do. Well, how does it
Yeah.
impact? I'm curious, how does it impact a person with hoarding disorder? Give me some more on how does it impact their lives? I mean, it does it do they become more agoraphobic? Does it impact relationships? Um,
Mhm.
uh, what have you seen
Yeah.
in that regard?
Yeah. So, well, of course, they don't want anybody to their houses, so they won't let people in out of fear. For one thing, they're fear that they're going to have authorities called and they're going to get ripped out of their homes, and things are just going to go sideways there. Um, they also, they so the fear is a big one. I must say that I run into that one all the time. But what was the question? I'm sorry, I kind of lost that train.
How does it impact their lives, relationships with others?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the relationship aspect. So if they have other people in the home that maybe that person is not having issues with chronic disorganization, which I should say that chronic disorganization is kind of like the umbrella term for things like hoarding disorder. There's a lot of categories underneath there, like ADHD, OCD, um, uh, PTSD. I know it's a lot of initials, but and aging as well. Those things all fall under that category. And hoarding is just one aspect of it. It just impairs the ability to organize, that executive functioning part of the brain. So in that, there may be people in the home that don't have those difficulties, and they may be pushing back on the person that is having those difficulties. And then if that person is having more stress in their life, or they lost their job, or they had a divorce, or a parent pass away, anything like that will even exacerbate the accumulation and the hoarding disorder, because they're trying to cope. They're trying to cope with that loss or that stress. And I see that a lot in my clients, that they're just trying to cope. But those relationships are super strained because the other spouse is like, it's too much. They just need to get their crap out of my house, and I just can't handle this anymore. So there's a lot of the relationship aspects that go into it.
So speaking to like the loved ones, spouses, family members of somebody with hoarding disorder, um, what is it that you'd say, based on your experience, treating this, that they need to understand that they don't, or give, how should they look at it maybe differently than the way that they're looking at it now, which is probably a normal reaction. Like, I need this stuff out. Like, I can't function either. It's impacting me. What would you say to them to get their mindset shift a little bit different to help them understand the person who's suffering?
Yeah, it's hard to not take it personally, right? When you're living in the home with that person. Um, to know that it is a mental health condition. It's not that that person is necessarily doing it out of spite or meanness or anything like that. There may be components of that in some ways, but in it's a compulsion, it's an acquiring, it's a part of the brain, it's the way that brain chemistry is going. And if that person doesn't have therapy or some kind of intervention with hoarding disorder, a lot of studies have shown that it goes right back to hoarding disorder unless, so even like cleaning out a space, it will go right back to that unless they have treatments and strategies that's addressing that. But most times I'll say, let's do some more research. Let me give you some information about hoarding disorder and why this is so complicated for your loved one to deal with, and why it feels like this stuff is more important than you are.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times they feel that way, and I say, well, the stuff doesn't make them feel bad, doesn't judge them, doesn't go away, right? People do. People go away, people judge, people do things that hurt other people. And so the stuff gives them comfort.
Yeah, comfort and security. And so it's not, but I can see that from the loved one's perspective. I've never thought about it that way, but I could see the feeling of they value this stuff more than me or more than our relationship. That isn't really what's going on. What's going on is they don't really have a choice without treatment, without some form of intervention and tools. And we're going to get to that. What are some things that do work to help people that are recovering from hoarding disorder? How do they break the cycle? You mentioned therapy. What are some other things? Because I know just showing up and cleaning it out is not a good first step. What do you recommend for somebody who's in the acute stages of hoarding?
Yeah. So yeah, number one, trying to do a clean out with, let's say the person's gone for a weekend and they're like, okay, it's my chance to clean the house out. Oh my gosh, the stress levels and the mistrusts are going to go off the chart. So I don't recommend that. I don't recommend they just throw things away behind the person's back. I know it happens all the time, but they're like, well, they're just going to want to keep it. And so, well, okay, then we need to talk about presenting this information to the person that's hoarding. And do you see what their insight is? Because if they have very little insight into that they're actually hoarding, then yeah, it's going to be really, really difficult to change the behaviors, right? And unless that therapy is actually done. And the types of therapies, there's all different kinds of ones, but cognitive behavioral therapy is pretty traditionally done with hoarding disorder. EMDR also, because if there's a lot of trauma, loss, grief in that person's life, which is also seen quite often with somebody with hoarding issues.
So
Those
stop on
things.
that point for a minute, because
Yeah.
you mentioned cognitive behavioral therapy and EMDR. Explain the difference between those two. So if a person's listening, what is cognitive behavioral versus EMDR therapy?
So kind of behavioral therapy is, so you're working with the therapist and you're talking through the emotions, the effect that behaviors are having, and the thought processes and the feelings. You're working through those, and the therapist is giving that person different goals and things to work on, in those sessions. EMDR is where it's either done auditory or visually with therapy that goes between the different sides of the brain. So it may be where you're wearing a headphone and it's beeping back and forth. And then the therapist is walking you through the process of remembering a traumatic event on how to deal with it. It like tamps down the emotions essentially.
Yeah.
So it's not such a gut feeling thing, which I understand that. I have an anxiety disorder myself that I've lived with my whole life. It runs through my family. So I know what that gut feeling is. And so with EMDR, it reduces that gut feeling and it makes you be able to remember, have those memories. It doesn't erase those memories, but it lets you deal with them easier. That's one but that's another type of therapy. And they use it a lot. They use that a lot with PTSD.
Well, and I think it's because, and correct me if I say something inaccurate here, but I also am a person who've had anxiety disorder my whole life, and so I think what it is EMDR helps to retrain those neural pathways in your brain because
Yes.
they call it getting stuck in a rut, right? So if you're a person who has general anxiety disorder, your neural pathways are preconditioned for you to experience that. You have to do something to retrain those connections in the synapses, right? You have to do something to retrain that. And EMDR is one way of doing it. Exposure response is another way.
Yes, exactly.
Is hoarding disorder highly treatable? Like, would you say it's a treatable disorder? Like, what's the success? I don't know if you know an exact statistic, but in general.
I don't know the statistics, but it is a very difficult disorder to treat. And so there's not a lot of therapists that know how to treat it. And that's the problem that we have in mental health is finding enough therapists. But then also, if I'm working with someone with hoarding disorder, I ask them, I say, hey, or any other, anxiety, depression, whatever. I say, you're working with a therapist ongoing. And how's that going? Would you mind if I collaborated with them? Let's sign a release of information and I'll collaborate with them on the therapy. But they, if we're working back and forth on that actually, we all have a treatment plan together essentially on how to work with that person. It works well going that way. But if the person doesn't have the insight and they're not in therapy, a lot of times treating that person is not going to be successful.
Yeah, that's
and rapid clean outs too are 100%. It goes back to hoarded conditions. 100%. There's no therapy.
And I think my question may be a little unfair as to how treatable is it or what's the effectiveness of treatment, because it reminds me, I'm old enough to remember my first diagnosis with OCD, and that was at a time where nobody had heard of OCD, right? So back then, people, not people, but the general knowledge or the general thinking in the mental health community was that OCD is really hard to treat. And it wasn't so much that it was hard to treat. It's a highly treatable disorder. It was that there weren't a lot of therapists that knew how to treat it. And we didn't know a lot about it. The more that people came out of the shadows with OCD and the more it became part of the common nomenclature, the more therapists that specialized in treating it, the more we found it's highly treatable. And that I'm suspecting that may be similar for hoarding disorder as time goes on. I don't know.
It is getting better, but there's still a shortage. I'm always looking for therapists that can work with that. I'm actually trying to find one right now for this client that I've had for many, many years. She's had on and off with therapy, and it's not been really effective to her or for her. But the other thing too is they have to divulge to the therapist that they have hoarding disorder. A lot of times they may be talking about anxiety, depression, and loss and everything, but they haven't talked about that aspect of it.
Yeah, and they're not seeing the therapist in their home, so the therapist may not know.
Yeah. There's a lot of people that are you would have no idea that they had hoarding disorder because they're functioning like everybody else out in the world, and they just don't have people to their homes, and they just hide that part.
Very similar to maybe all mental disorders, but I know the ones that we talk about, the anxiety disorders, you often would have no idea. Like when I tell people that I suffer from anxiety disorder my whole life, they're like, "You're kidding!" Like nobody believes me, right? Because I built businesses and I did these things. Well, That doesn't mean I wasn't in the acute stages of anxiety disorder at different times. It's just I learned to hide it very well.
Right.
And people with hoarding disorder can do the same thing.
Yes.
If you're a person listening to this and you think, I think that might be me. I think, this is not just collecting stuff. This is not just, keeping a lot of things. I think I have a disorder. I think it's interfering with my life. What's the one step you would recommend they take? Would it be reach out to a therapist, call you? Like what's the thing they can do next?
Multiple things. First, just dive in and Google it first. If you think you might be having some problems with this, lots of information will come up, but at least you'll get a little bit of background and maybe kind of see that you're not alone, that there's other people like you. The other place is, so I'm part of the Institute for Challenging Disorganization. So we're all professionals that have the chronic disorganization specialization, essentially, either having mental health background or just or the interest in learning more about this aspect of organization. The website is challengingdisorganization.org. And that's where you can find a public part of the website as well, where there's fact sheets and you can take a test to see if you have chronic disorganization. There's whole sections on fact sheets where you can find information about hoarding disorder. You can also go to the International OCD Foundation as well, which I believe it's iocdf.org. They have a lot of information, and they also have a database for hoarding disorder and other, like OCD, anxiety, that kind of thing. And you can look for a therapist for that as well. And as far as the Institute for Challenging Disorganization, so we all get levels of certificates and education through them. It's like very instrumental in my education over the last 15, 16 years. And so you can get different specialties in that. You can do a search as well for a pro in your area that has the background and training on chronic disorganization and all those different disorders underneath it. So those are probably the biggest ones that I usually refer people to. And if they're looking for a therapist, too, Psychology Today.com, they usually have a good site too where people can go find a therapist. I'm always networking trying to find therapists that open to working with my clients.
That's really helpful. A couple other questions for you before we wrap up, Susie. If someone's listening and they want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to reach you?
Probably so if you go to my website, Susie's, so SUSIES, organizationsolutions.com, there's a place where you can fill out a contact form. Has my phone number, which is 616-554-3175. And then my email is sosorganize@gmail.com. And that's awesome. And I work with other organizers in the area that also have chronic disorganization training. So if it's a job that's bigger than what I can do, which a lot of times hoarding disorder is a big job. So we usually start small with the person, develop trust with that person and understanding that, no, we're not throwing away things behind their back. We're going to work with their family. They're going to work with them, work with the therapist. And then if I have to bring in other organizers to help get things moving along more, then I'll bring those other experts in with me too.
That's terrific. Those are great resources, both for you and your site and your organization, as well as the resources that you provided for somebody who's looking to find out where they can get help. Challengingdisorganization.org, International OCD Foundation, Psychology Today for therapists. That's really helpful. I guess the last question I have, Susie, before we wrap up is, if you're listening to the podcast or you're listening and you believe you have hoarding disorder or you have a loved one that you're concerned about, what's one thing that you would say to them if they have not sought treatment yet? They're just suffering in silence. What's one message you would have for somebody like that?
That you're not alone. You're not alone at all. There are other people that are struggling as well. I didn't mention there are clutter support groups online and hoarding support groups too. So if you are somebody in that group, maybe you would want to go that direction and just find other people like yourself. Reach out to people that have an understanding. So with professional organizers, like I said, some of us have this specialization. So find people that understand the disorder, isn't going to have judgment of you. And then with the families, just find out as much information as you can about hoarding disorder and reach out to people like me that can actually do some consultations with them and the person, kind of see where they're at and go from there. You know, seek
That's very
those services, seek the services, and try to do some intervention. Now, if it's a super severe case where there's not much insight with a person with hoarding disorder, you know, we try our best, but a lot of times it's very, very difficult to make any progress in those. And my time on the Grand Rapids Hoarding Task Force, I was on that task force for 5 years, and there's a lot of people that have been on that list for many, many years, and those are the really, really tough ones. So I'm not saying that they're you can't do treatment with them, but it's more on the difficult side for sure.
So I'm hearing a lot of themes around be proactive, reach out, seek help. There is help. You're not alone. Thank you for saying that. You're not alone. That applies to if you're listening and you think you may have hoarding disorder or you may have an anxiety disorder, you're certainly not alone. And that's really what we exist at the Anxiety Resource Center to make sure that everyone's aware of, is that you're not alone. There are millions of people that struggle just like you do, and there is help and there is hope. And Susie mentioned her anxiety disorder. I mentioned mine. We're living proof that there's hope that you can live a life in relative peace with your disorder. So
Yeah.
thank you, Susie, for being on the program. This has been incredibly educational, very helpful, and I appreciate you giving us some of your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for the opportunity.
We will be back next time with another episode of Anxiety Unraveled. I am Mike Maddox, your host, and this show is always brought to you by the Anxiety Resource Center. That's anxietyresourcecenter.org. Thanks for listening, and have a great day, everybody.